Hey all, Pixel here. We are going to be working on the wagon today because it has another fuel leak. Yes, the only other time this has really appeared on the channel has been me fixing a fuel leak at the back, and now it's leaking at the front. I mean, I'm not surprised. One fuel line's rusted out, the other ones probably are too. I've been putting this job off for a while just because I barely ever drive this. It's kind of a backup car slash when I feel like driving it. But when the Prius went down for what was supposed to be an afternoon and ended up being over a week, I realized the logistics sucked because she had to drive the van so that she had something safe to drive all the way to her work and back, and I was driving the wagon around locally smelling gasoline because it's the only thing I had to drive. So realistically, if I fix the gas leak on this, we'll have functional vehicles. So that means that I can take the van down and rip the whole front end apart and do all the other work I want to do to it without risking being in a similar situation of not enough vehicles. So if I get this fixed, then I can start in on the van. So that's what we're going to do. So it's basically impossible to show even with a light, but down in here, where my finger is, there's two fuel lines, or rather there's the main fuel line that goes to the engine, and then there's the vent line that goes from the charcoal canister to the gas tank. I'm not sure which is leaking, but it doesn't really matter at this point because either way I'm going to have to fix it. So what I'm going to do is get in here, and I can't figure, they're like literally on top of each other in the spot where it's leaking, and it's all sopping wet over there, so there's no way to really diagnose which is which. So I think I might just replace the fuel line. The main fuel line is kind of nasty. It's not too bad here as far as I can tell, but further down under the car it's in pretty nasty shape. So I think I may just want to replace that regardless. But before I get in there, I need to get myself some access. The air conditioning system on this car is dead, has been for a while. It's an R12 system, so I can't easily just recharge it or whatever. So what I'm going to do is rip the compressor, the dryer, and the hoses out of here so that it gives me some access in there. I'm going to hang on to the pieces because down the line, if I keep this thing, especially if I do an engine swap in it, I'd like to get the AC working again. But that's a low priority. So I'm going to pull all this, I'm going to plug the ends of the hoses so I don't get contamination in the system. And then that'll give me more room to work in there. That might be enough that I can tell which of the two lines is leaking. All right, I think this is as far as I'm going to get with disconnecting. I managed to get this out, the dryer. I managed to get the two hoses out. This will not come out because inexplicably on the underside, I can't even show it to you, I don't think. Oh, maybe I can. So there's two screws here and here. There was another, or two bolts here and here. There's another bolt back here, but up front over here, there's a stud that is threaded into the AC pump and then slides through and then had a nut on the end. And that stud means that I can't lift the AC unit out because the stud's in the way, and I can't tip it up enough to get the back out because the top up here hits. So if I tip it out enough that that doesn't hit, then it's way down low in the front, in the back here, which means I can't then lift it up enough. So basically it's jammed in there because of that, for the inexplicably stupid reason of using a stud in the front there. I genuinely have no idea why they would do that. It's possible that if I took this bracket off, I could then maybe pitch it up, but that's several more bolts. So at the moment, this is going to just hang out here, and I'm going to decide later how much I care. Now that you've got more room and I've cleaned it down there, you can see the two. So these are the two lines. One of these is the fuel line, one of these is the return line, and the one going the other way is the brake line. The larger one is the fuel line. And looking at this, I sprayed these all down and I think I see fuel already coming out of the main fuel line. And I'm going to start the engine, or maybe just start the fuel pump. There's my leak. Leak's not where I thought it was. It is, that line's the fuel line, so that you just barely make it out. There it is. Yep, there's my fuel leak. It's a little bit further back, and it is definitely coming from the main line, kind of like in the back. It's just the line is just kind of generally failed, so that needs to be replaced. It's not a fixable thing. There's no sense in sectioning in just a little bit to repair that, because the rest of the line is going to be probably just as bad inside. All right, so now that I know it's definitely the main fuel line, I've got to replace that. And realistically, what I need to do is, at the back here, the fuel pump is, or the fuel filter is just under that door. That has a standard Ford click-lock connector, like when I replaced the other section of line. That goes into a bit of plastic line, and then into a hard line that runs up through there, all up around, up through here, down to another piece of plastic line that's hooked into a connector a lot like these AC lines. Why Ford uses so many different connectors, I don't effing know. So basically what I need to make a call on is, am I going to try and run a new hardline, which is likely to be very difficult. I'm going to use NICOP, which will make it a little easier, but it's still going to be very difficult because routing it through everything and whatnot. The original line was installed before the body was put on the chassis, so it's not routed in a way that ever considers that it has to come out again. And so that's one of the problems. Oh, that's one of the methods, is hard line and then an adapter at both ends. The other option is to run plastic line the entire way, which will be easier in the sense that routing it through things are easier. It'll be harder in the sense that I have to secure it very regularly the way the hard line doesn't need to be. So probably be zip tied to the return line. And I need to protect it in a lot of places, which means I'm going to have to sleeve it with like vacuum line or something for most, if not all, of the run as well. And I have to be very careful of the routing, because it is not super close to, but it is not super far from the exhaust over there. So I just have to make sure that I keep it as far away as possible. I'm slightly leaning towards plastic line, but it's also going to be an expense thing. So I think I'm done for today. I need to think on this and maybe do a little bit of research. I know there isn't anybody who makes a replacement line for this. So I think that's it for today. And I'm going to pick this up once I have decided on a solution and bought the supplies for it. Make addendum that I managed to get the AC compressor off. It was an absolute disaster. As you can see by the aluminum shards and the chipping there, I actually ended up having to cut away 2 of the tabs to give me enough room, and even then this pointless stud that was in here bent in the process and jammed itself into the aluminum bracket, so it was an absolute disaster to get that free. But hey, that's out. I have space in here now to work. I'm going to put a bolt here just to hold these things together. This will come back down and bolt there, and then if I put AC in the future, I'm not going to have a stud there. I'm going to have a normal bolt like a sane person would. But yeah, this at least gets that out of the way, so I don't have to bolt it back in place just to keep it from rattling or whatever. And it's a few weeks later. I finally figured out how I'm doing this and got the parts together and got the time. I'm going to be using these compression fittings. This end will take the nylon fuel line. This end will go on the NiCop hard lines. And this is basically the best solution because you can't get the little barb fitting that the nylon line slides onto in a way that's permanently, like you can't put that on the end of a line in a way that doesn't therefore have two connections, one between that and the hard line and then between the nylon line and that, so this adds just as many connections. So what I'm going to do is cut, there's the bit of nylon line that comes down, like this line goes down, connects to a bit of nylon line that connects to this line, which is the bad one. So I'm going to cut that there, and one end of this is going to get connected to the hard line going there, and then the same deal down at the fuel filter back by the wheel. So everything from the fuel filter up to here is going to get replaced with NiCop, which should take care of this problem. It's going to be an interesting thing to run because it's kind of stuck in the body over there because the body bushings have collapsed just enough on this car that those lines are now not pinched but held there. Like they're not, you can't run another line in there because there's not enough gap anymore. So I'm going to have to run the new line one side or the other of the frame rail probably, or do something other interesting. So, and since I want to do this with one piece of NiCop, it's going to be an interesting challenge to get it either up from underneath and through and over here, or down here and then over and along the frame rail and up. There's at least two cross members that has to go over underneath. I think what I'm going to have to do is unwind the NiCop and like figure out where I'm doing it from, but feed it all in from one end or all in from the other loosely, get it connected at one end and in a place where I can connect the other one, and then do the final sort of bending in place and securing, and then cut the other line out. So I know I've mentioned this in other videos, I may have mentioned this earlier in this. The beauty of NiCop line is that if you're very careful with it, not even very careful, if you're reasonably careful with it, you can bend it with your hands. It is soft enough that you don't need the tool to bend it, and it's not hyper prone to kinking the way aluminum line is. So it gives you a lot more flexibility to run something like this because you can kind of feed it into place and sort of make it work as you go along without a lot of problem. As long as you don't bend it, you won't work harden it in a way that becomes a problem. So I actually have less of this than I thought. For some reason I thought I had a much longer piece. So this may not actually be long enough. If it isn't long enough, I'm going to get all the fiddly stuff down this end done, and then put a connector on and add a little bit more. Just because I don't need to buy another 25 feet of it to do this job. So I'm leaning towards running it down the outside of the frame rail over here because the splash shield almost immediately covers it in a way that means it won't be directly exposed to the wheel. And then that'll be actually, I don't know if that's going to be easier or harder on the underside though, because I don't know if that's going to, if I can get it over the frame rail to the inside easily, or if I'm going to cause myself a new problem. It currently runs at the top of the frame rail for most of this and then drops down further down. So yeah, I need to wrap the end of this in electrical tape so that I don't, as I'm pushing it through places, I don't just fill it with crud, because all that'll just go right into the motor, and it's after the fuel filter, so it's a great way to ruin an injector or two. So I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to poke around a little bit, and then you'll be on time lapse, so you'll either see this feeding out or you'll see this me feeding this in, one or the other, depending on how I decide to go about it. Alright, after a bit of a false start, I've got this end in. I initially thought was from below, I realized that the old line ran basically right at the edge of where the rail curves off. So I was like, oh, I can run it right next to that. Plenty of room, but I couldn't get the curve right because I couldn't get my hand in there, so it kept laying itself against the catalytic converter, which seemed like a bad idea. So I pulled it all back down and I ran it on this side. It basically runs across the frame rail next to the body mount and then comes up in the wheel well, but it is completely protected by the wheel well, like inner fender, and then comes across here, bolts into the original clamp, and comes down here. I haven't connected it over there yet, but it's in the right basic area. The old line was so thin and weak that I literally cut this and pulled up on it and just flexed and snapped, and then did that again here. I haven't found the bit that was actually leaking, and I'm starting to suspect it might be the return line from the charcoal canister, but given how thin that is, I think I might still be right. Actually, no, I take it back. It's back over here where the line still is in place. It's leaking. There's another, I think there's another bracket holding it over there, but I can't even see it with all the air conditioning gunk in the way. Yeah, there's another retainer here holding both lines. I think I'm going to end up leaving the bit of line that's there just there, and I started yanking on it down here and it cracked in another place. That's why there's a puddle of gasoline. But let's see if this will show it all. All right, so here's where the new line comes down. Here's where the old line goes up. They're basically on the opposite sides of the frame rail. There's a clip here, and then this comes down, and there's another. I have no idea what nut you're seeing now, but there's another clip. There it is, right there, that I need it to clip into. So I think what I'm going to do is cut the line somewhere over here, and just leave that bit in place, but bring this down. I may or may not put it in this clip just because I don't know if that's a bend that I can make easily, but I'm going to bring it more or less along this frame rail down, and I'm going to keep pulling this out and running in its place. We jump over here. It's got to run behind this body mount and along, and then somewhere in this area is where the plastic and line starts. So I just have to just like get this out of the way, cut the plastic line, and hook this in. So I'm at the easier part of it now anyway. I'm going to try and get it in the original clips. If I can't, I'm going to find ways to retain it. I'll probably like put a little bit of, if I can't retain it to that, I'll put a little bit of rubber over this other line and put a zip tie around them or something just to keep it in place. But the hard part is basically done, I think. It's just going to be fiddly to get it all reasonably neatly run under here. Jumping back over here, I do want to bring this much tighter around here just so it's not kind of floating in space. Especially like if I ever have to change a transmission, it would be easier if the lines are out of the way. But yeah, it's going pretty good. The hardest part is going to be getting the bits of this out, because I don't have enough room to get my normal tool around it, and I can't come in with a cutting wheel and cut it because gasoline. Can use a Sawzall type thing, but even that's not super great. Yeah, so I'm just going to keep getting at it. I'm not going to bother to film. I'm going to just jump to the next step because obviously there's no way I can put the camera here where you'll see anything. All right, I think we are done. As you can see, it's gotten quite dark, but I've got the line in and connected there to the old nylon line. It's secured to the one thing there, and then it drops down like I showed you over there. Under here, turned out this is actually the return line, so fortunately I didn't cut that. The main line is up under and doesn't drop down until somewhere up in there. So there's still about 2 feet of the old fuel line in there, but this runs along here. It runs all along, clipped there, and then tied into the nylon line back there. And just so that nobody ever does something stupid and says it was my fault, these compression fittings are okay for fuel line. Do not ever use these on brake lines. They are not safe. They can't stand up to the pressure of brake lines, and you will likely have a failure. Fuel lines are not nearly as high pressure, so they're okay for fuel lines, but do not ever use them for brake lines. But yeah, that's all connected up. So now what we're going to do is fire it up, or at least fire the fuel pump up, and find out whether it leaks or not, and see whether I'm done. All right. Fuel pump turned off. That's a good first sign, because that means that it's not pissing fuel out. That and there. That's completely dry. And here. And that's completely dry. So yeah, looks good. Let's fire her up just to make sure. Sounds good. Don't worry about this light. I put a brand new fuel tank and sender unit and everything in this because I got it off of somebody who had literally like just replaced it and then blew the engine in his car. And this light, which wasn't a problem before, now randomly goes on and off instead of just going on in a quarter tank. So I don't know if it's because it was, I don't know. Anyway, that's not related to what we're doing. But anyway, it runs fine. Took a little bit to start because I'm sure all the all the lines were completely empty. But it's running fine. It's running smooth. It's definitely got plenty of fuel going to it. So I think we can call this job done. That means I can drive the wagon again, more than just like around town cautiously while smelling gasoline. I think the next thing it deserves is a full clean out, inside and out, because I don't think I have vacuumed this car since before the pandemic, so it's a little due for it. But anyway, that'll do me for today. Talk to you all later. Bye.